see that all the participants are let in, we'll kick off here and get started. All right, just a couple more. That number keeps ticking up there. So Michael and I were just talking about before we started today that my computer clock is 3 minutes off of his laptop and computer clock. So somebody else might have the same thing happening. So I'm just going to give it another 10 seconds and then we will get started talking about pay transparency, a really fun and exciting topic that we'll have to cover for the next hour today. All right, Michael, it looks like that number is slowing down on participants. So I think we have the bulk of the attendees that are into the room, and we have our awesome team of Larissa in the background who will let people in with any issues. So we're going to kick off today. It's 11 o'clock Central Standard Time, and we're going to talk about Minnesota pay transparency and what employers need to be doing to prepare for the new legislation that was already passed that goes into effect shortly. And then how all that's going to affect everything else. So we want to start with introducing you to the team here at Abdo that's going to be speaking with you today. And you see Michael and my face here. So we're both a part of the Abdo Workforce Solutions team, which focuses really on people and processes related to payroll and human resources and anything that you can think of that falls in either one of those buckets. You also see Leah Davis joining us here now. She's the partner who leads the whole division of Workforce Solutions, both the HR and the payroll team. And Leah's face is very important because she's going to be answering all of your questions that come in today as best she can in rapid fire response. So you'll see, if you look at the toolbar of your Zoom webinar, you'll see a Q&A function, not the chat function, but the Q&A function. It literally says Q&A. And if you click in there, you can see that you can type a question. Leah is going to be spending the whole next hour in the Q&A discussion box, trying to answer any questions that you might have. And what's really important to know is that there's an option there where you can vote up questions. So if you have a question, it's very likely somebody else had it. And if they already typed it in, instead of typing your own, you can vote it up. That's going to be very important as we get to the end because we have a jam-packed hour of content. Particularly, we have some actual case studies that we're going to walk through with you all. So we're going to have very limited time for actual live Q&As at the very end. So what Leah's going to do is answer the ones that she can as they come in, but also pay attention to any questions that get voted up by a lot of people or that are coming in multiple times. She's going to jump in and let Michael and I know so that we can answer those questions. So again, any questions on the content, on the webinar, on what we're talking about, on pay, you want to go to the Q&A function. If you're having any technological issues, either with sound or the Zoom access, or if Michael's head starts to look funny in the video, you're going to want to use the chat function. And the chat function is going to get you to the Abdo scheduler team. And that's our awesome internal team that's supporting us here. And they'll be able to help you with any of those technological issues. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through our agenda today. And like I said, it is jam-packed. So we're going to spend the first half of the webinar, about 20 to 25 minutes, kind of setting the foundation of what is pay transparency, why does it matter, what are the compliance areas that you need to be aware of, and then how does it impact your existing workforce and the things outside of just setting a pay range. What does that look like in compensation philosophy? And then the last 25 to 30 minutes, we're going to walk through 3 different case studies. So we have one large case study and a couple different scenarios that we're going to talk about, because in our experience, we know from our work with current clients and even our own organization that sometimes actually getting in the weeds of things that really happen help us see where some of these roadblocks and challenges that we can identify ahead of time. So we're going to get started right away. Michael, I would love to hand it to you to kick us off to just talk about what is pay transparency. I think that's a word that gets used a lot, and it means something on a national scale, but also specifically in Minnesota has some really important context right now too. So talk to us a little bit about what does pay transparency mean?
Yeah, thanks, Brenna. This has definitely been a topic that has been bubbling up over the last couple of years and something that our team has been keeping a close eye on. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we now see that over half of the United States and local cities within states have some version of pay transparency or pay equity legislation. And there's kind of varying scopes around this. So pay transparency, it's a common term, but there's a lot of uncommon definitions around what does that actually mean based on the states or cities that have varying legislation already passed or in the process of getting it approved. So we're seeing things like salary history prohibition. So Minnesota, as you likely know, passed that January 1 effective this year, 2024, banning asking applicants on their application about what their current salary is. We're also seeing now in Minnesota just passed, this is the topic we're talking about today, of the salary and benefit info on new postings. So when you go out and post a position, you have to provide candidates with some degree of salary information, benefits posting, and there's kind of a wide range of what legislations are requiring for that. Even some are saying you need very detailed benefit information, or some are saying it's just a good faith effort to try to give people some degree of understanding of what's included in pay. But we're also seeing, let's actually go back for one quick second, Brenna.
Oh, sure. Yep.
We're kind of seeing other states like Colorado and Illinois, they're looking at kind of taking it one step further enough and requiring notice requirements or even pay equity reporting. I know we have some public sector clients and employers on the call today, and in Minnesota, they're very familiar with pay equity reporting, and that every 3 years they need to send in reports to the states saying, hey, this is how we're paying people, and making sure that there's no gender discrimination in pay. So I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota and other states kind of follow the same trend of starting with those salary history prohibitions and going all the way up to pay equity reporting. We're also seeing Indeed or similar job boards. If you haven't noticed, if you post a job on Indeed right now and don't provide a salary range, they might auto-generate an estimated salary range for you just based on what they're seeing from crowdsourced data. So there's really kind of a lot of angles that employers are kind of having to look at with pay transparency. And we're going to talk about a lot of that today. But
Yeah, Michael,
let's
just
start
as a
with
side
Minnesota.
note, can I say
Yeah.
this? Michael, can I jump in on this real quick? I was watching the Olympics last night. Hopefully the rest of you all are enjoying the Olympics. I'm hardcore. I watch it every night and I record everything and I want to watch all the weird stuff. But there was an Indeed commercial last night. And I've seen it now 3 times during the Olympics shows that talking about Indeed saying, hey, you no longer have to guess what the salary range is. Indeed tells you what the range is for your position and is talking about it. So even if you're in a state that doesn't require it, it has arrived, everybody. I just want you to know that whether or not this is not one of those big bad Minnesota things, this is here whether you were ready for it or not. It's now going to be required, but whether or not it was required, this was already happening. And so really we're just entering an era of legislation to get everybody caught up. But if you weren't here, it was happening on its own anyways.
Yeah, so Minnesota's legislation, we're going to talk really briefly on this because we're more interested in kind of the trickle-down effect. Compliance for this is actually fairly straightforward. It applies to any employers with at least 30 employees, and you must include a starting salary range. We bold that because we're going to talk a lot about the difference between posting a starting salary range versus posting your full salary range and kind of the pros and cons of those. And you also need to include a general description of benefits and other compensation. Not a lot of clarity on what other compensation means and the detail that's going to be required in there, but my interpretation based on what other states are doing is if you have a heavily commissioned position, for example, you might need to provide some detail there, but I wouldn't go as far as saying things like, oh, you might get uniform reimbursements or other smaller things like that. Under Minnesota's legislation, you cannot post an open-ended range, so you can't just say leave it open for interpretation or open to negotiation. That wouldn't be allowed. However, you can say, if I'm just going to post one static rate, I don't have a range, I'm just going to pay this $20 an hour no matter what, that would be allowed under this legislation. Again, it'll take effect January 1st, 2025. And one thing to note on this is we're going to talk about wage disclosure a lot on the call today, and we want to really make sure that you all know and your teams and your managers know that Minnesota has a Wages Disclosure Act that prohibits, employers from preventing employees from talking about their own pay or talking to their peers about pay. And that still stands on this. And that's really going to be important because as we'll talk about, pay transparency legislation kind of just leads to a more natural conversation about compensation overall. Yeah. So compliance, like I said, at face value, fairly straightforward. But Brenna, what else do we need to be thinking about as we get ready for this January effective date?
Yeah, I think, Michael, you're spot on that the compliance piece feels really easy. This is an easy piece of legislation to say like, oh, check a box, right? Most of us are spinning a little bit and still getting some counseling to recover from the ESST rollout. And so we're like, oh, this is an easy one. But really, there's a lot of things that go beyond compliance when we talk about what pay transparency is going to impact overall in the workforce. One of the areas that this is already impacting you if you don't know it is going to begin impacting you more is the impact on recruitment. And again, that example of the commercial that we saw or that I saw, and probably many of you did too, during the Olympics broadcast last night about Indeed in crowdsourcing, essentially crowdsourcing data and saying, hey, we can tell you what that is. Well, now they're going to actually have real data. It's not even going to be data taken from some employers. They're going to have real data. So an applicant in the state of Minnesota is going to say, hey, I'm going to go look for, let's say the example we're going to use at the very end is a maintenance technician. So I'm going to go look for a maintenance technician position. I can actually go to Indeed, who's going to take Minnesota job posting information and see what is the minimum, what's the maximum, what's the average, what's the mid-range, what do people hire for? So they're going to have real concrete data to be able to come in and negotiate. So it's not going to be any more, well, they can guess and they might have some idea, but really that data is not great. It's no longer going to be Indeed. Wages used to be a little bit like Zillow, right? So you could go to Zillow and be like, oh, my house is worth $9.3 million, but really no one's going to pay $400,000 for it, right? So that was kind of the wage range, Wild West, but now it's going to be real concrete data. So in the recruiting process, you are going to have to really think ahead about what you want to do this. And our team has talked a lot about the challenge of deciding how you're going to post for positions, and that you really need to be proactive in thinking about this. So sounds really simple to say, hey, okay, I need to post a position starting January 1st of 2025. I know I'm going to have to put the starting range. But if you don't have an understanding of, are you at the low end of the market? Are you at the high end of the market? Are you at the middle end of the market? If you're at the low end, are you going to make an already challenging recruiting market that much more challenging, right? So you imagine how many maintenance technicians positions are out there, and you go out and you search it, and you are the lowest in all of them, and you're not offering other non-compensable benefits, such as maybe you have a really flexible scheduling option, right? So yes, it's a maintenance technician, but you don't have any on-call weekends. That's a huge deal if you're a maintenance technician, right? You're really excited about that. Or maybe you offer a really, really, really generous retirement package. And so you need to, but how are you going to change your postings to make sure that when people are looking for jobs, if the only thing they're seeing is that starting wage, what's it going to be? So then you think, okay, well, I'll just put from 20 to 30. I'm going to put the highest end of my range. But really, then you think about the candidate experience, and they're coming in and they say, well, you put 20 to 30 and you hired me at $20. So am I the least valuable person on the team? Am I not worth what that top range is for? And am I not worth, so by coming into my new job offer, feeling like I'm already not getting what I deserve wage range, right? I think the other thing is, if you don't post high enough, are you going to lose candidates? When you start looking at more higher level positions where you're looking at people who are starting in kind of those higher salary levels that are exempt from overtime, particularly if you think about this in six-figure positions, right? So the difference between $105,000 and $195,000 is very significant pay. And if you put that lower range because you want to start there and you don't want to put your max, but your max is that high, are you going to lose candidates who aren't going to come? So it really, it sounds like a very simple thing, but there really does need to be intentional, thoughtful, and proactive discussion in your organization about how are you going to approach this. What I would tell you is that if you have any HR peers or people that you know who are in the public employment sector, they've been doing this forever, right? So they've actually kind of got this locked down, and they really have found a way to make that system work. So it is possible, but it doesn't happen by accident. So you really need to understand that. You need to think about impacts on your referral programs. You need to think about how are you going to post. We're going to talk about this in a little bit when we talk about the impact on your internal workforce. But how are you going to post if you're looking at ranges for hiring externally versus internally? Are you posting internally? Are you also posting the internal ranges, or are you only posting that externally where it's required? And really thinking about that.
Brittany, can I touch quick on the referral program? Because this is something I was thinking about this morning as I was prepping for the call. Having gone through referral programs both from internal HR and now as an employee who's not in an internal HR team, the referral programs are often advertised, and we really want to encourage people to go out and find be recruiters for your organization. And when I do that personally, if I go to my friends who are accountants and I'm trying to refer them to our accounting firm, the first question I always get is, well, what does it pay? What does the pay look like there? And I don't always have a great answer. Sometimes I might have some insights based on my own positions, or I encourage them to go just apply and talk to our HR team. But I think a positive spin on this pay transparency is like if you are now posting the ranges for positions, you're making your internal staff more effective recruiters, because when they go out and say, hey, I have this open position, this company's really great, I want you to come work with me over here, that first question that they're going to get is, well, what does the pay look like? You have something to give that referral right off the bat. So I think a lot of this is kind of intimidating and maybe looks at as, oh man, we got a lot to work on here, but this is a positive in my opinion. This is something that you can really lean into as something that could have a good impact on your recruitment strategies.
Yeah, I agree. I think people, organizations are going to approach this if they can dig into this and say, hey, this could be a positive, we could be intentional, transparent, this could be an internal growth and development program, positivity thing, referral program, or it's going to become, hey, we're only going to give you what we absolutely have to. And there isn't much of a gray area there. So everyone's going to have to make a choice about what they want to do. Okay, so we've got impact on recruitment. And so what do we do with that? One of the things we want you to walk away with today, from multiple different sections that we're going to talk about, is what do we need to do here? And what I would tell you, and Mike would tell you, and Leah would tell you, and all of our team that's working with clients, is you need to prepare your managers who are a part of the interviewing and hiring process. For some of you, that might just be HR professionals, right? So some of you are very large organizations have a recruitment department. And so the recruiters and HR partners are doing all of the initial phone screens, all of the initial conversations about salaries and wages and what that looks like in benefits. But I would tell you the bulk of our clients that we work with have hiring managers involved at some level of that process, if not the whole entire thing. And so you really need to prepare your managers ahead of time to understand what are the compensation basics, right? So what's the information out there? What is the difference between a range, a midpoint, and average? Why might ranges overlap, right? So why might you have a maintenance technician one is, $11 to $15, and a maintenance technician 2 is $12 to $18, right? So why does that exist? Talking about how you talk about pay in interviews. And again, this is just on the external recruiting side at this point. Michael's going to talk about the internal implications of this shortly, but talking about how to do that. Understanding what the policy is on salary negotiations. I think already, since when I started in human resources over 20 years ago, the amount of salary negotiations that I get in job offers has significantly increased. I think we're going to see that again. Again, you're going to have an educated candidate for the most part that understands what's there. Helping your managers understand. I wish I could say raise your hand if, but I can't. I can only see Leah and Michael. So Leah and Michael and Brenna, raise your hand if when you first started working, it was still a company was still allowed to say you're not allowed to talk about your salary with other employees, right? So when I first started working, that was the policy in the handbook that everybody, it was like a big secret. Yeah, right, Leah? Right? It's
You're
all,
aging us, Brenna. And then
I know, I'm
Michael's like,
sorry.
"No
It's-
I was like,
hands."
I think that was always the case for me. I don't think I could ever do that in policy.
Michael, you're up,
Yes, it was a
especially I've
pain.
aged us. It's true story. But when I first started, so again, I've been in human resources out of college and doing my career for over 20 plus years. And when I first started, that was a rule. You literally in a handbook could say you're not allowed to talk about compensation with people. And so we have managers who might not actually be caught up to speed already on the Wage Disclosure Act, which actually specifically prohibits you from saying you can't do that. In fact, your handbook needs to say, it's cool. You can talk about it. You're allowed to talk about your wage, your salary. And so helping managers understand that they can't say, oh yeah, Michael, here's all the 3 people on the team and what they're making. But they can't stop Michael from going and asking his coworkers what they talk about. And I will tell you that if you are a manager, a leader, and you think your people are not talking about pay, I just want you to know that you're wrong. So they're talking about it all of the time, especially if we look at the different generations again. So even if you look at Michael's work experience versus my work experience, and we're not that far apart. Don't correct me, Michael. We're not that far apart. But the disparity in that, Michael's never been in the workforce when wage and compensation hasn't been on the table, right? So we also have things helping them understand, talking about pay with their existing team. Again, I'm going to let that get really dug into in the next kind of implication, but Understanding what is pay for performance versus longevity versus COLA, and COLA stands for cost of living. And so what we talk about is an adjustment. Oftentimes it said cost of living increase. And so, for example, many of you have probably employees over the past couple of years who have said, hey, with the rate of inflation, my increases, my cost of living adjustment, my COLA I get every year doesn't even keep up with inflation. And so are we equipping managers to be able to explain and say, well, if we give increases based purely on the inflation number, what happens when inflation goes back down? Do we take that money back, right? And so helping them understand how compensation is set and that it's not as simple as it might seem when you look at it from the outside without understanding that. So helping those managers understand who are your managers that are a part of the hiring process. They should be your first line of defense and really equipping them to be talking about that. The other thing that you should be including in this training is talking about the impact on the existing workforce when we talk about culture. And so we talk about, this is the next impact, because two big impacts are recruiting, that's a huge one, but also on the existing workforce. And so when you're talking with your managers about this recruiting and training, that's what you need to be doing. You also need to be talking about what are the culture considerations for this, right? So again, that overall increased communication about pay. I will tell you that there is a whole generation of employees in the workforce that the idea that they can't know the range for their pay for their position feels like an absolute slap in the face and disrespect, right? So you don't even trust me to know my own pay range, right? Now, if you take that one step farther, let's say, for example, Michael's talking about his internal referral process, right? So he says to a friend, hey, we've got this new senior accountant position. You should come work here. Abdo's a great place to work. And side note, we don't do internal HR at Abdo. So we would be coming just from a regular employee, right? So, and we say, you should come work. And they say, well, what's the pay range? And we're like, I actually am not entirely sure what it is for that. And then that friend says, oh, well, let me go look at an external job posting because it's posted publicly. You just don't know it from an internal source, right? And so what that does with that internal culture of your people. And again, coming into, this is a major thing that your managers are going to need to be prepared for. So when you have those annual conversations about compensation, right? So it's an annual increase, maybe it's performance, maybe it's a COLA, whatever it might be affected by, that those employees, internal employees, can in under 5 minutes have all of the information available for, hey, I could go out with all my years of experience and I could get paid XYZ at all of our competitors because you as organization A are either low, mid, or max, whatever it might be. Michael, talk to us a little bit more about kind of those impacts to the existing workforce, because I think this is where we have, I think concern is not too strong of a word. If the HR leaders or the people in your organization leading this cause have their head in the sand, we have major concerns, and it is really in this existing workforce impact. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would be thinking about if I was internal HR right now would be potential for retention issues. If I'm a recruiter right now, come January, when I know all my competitors are going to have to start posting the pay ranges, the first thing that I'm going to do those first few weeks of January is go look at their job post. I'm going to see what they're paying for similar positions or promotional opportunities that I might have open. And if I see that we have a competitive advantage in the marketplace, or if I maybe am hedging my bet a little bit and I'm waiting to post what my ranges are if I don't have an open position yet, but I know that one's coming up. Those are the things that I'm going to be looking at. And then if I see that as an opportunity, I'm going to go on LinkedIn, find someone at my competitor and say, hey, I noticed that your manager role is posted at this. We can offer a 10% higher starting rate. Would you like to talk more? And I'm also concerned that people are going to be doing that for my open positions too. So this is really going to create, it's already a competitive landscape in the recruiting world right now. And I think this is going to drive more competition. It's going to be really a challenge for employers right now if they're not staying on top of compensation. So that's something that we talked about a little bit earlier about setting those initial ranges, but it's not just kind of a one and done. Let's set the range and now we're good. We can just post it every time. We would really encourage you all to maintain those ranges and make sure you're staying up to speed with market and building and continuing to build confidence in your pay ranges. And that second bullet point kind of touches on that of how you do that. You might need to go out and find some market data to do a study to determine, are my ranges actually competitive within the marketplace? And one area, and we'll spend some time talking about this a little bit later too, but when we work with clients who ask us for help on a market study, oftentimes they don't necessarily have a plan of what they're going to do with that information. Brenda has kind of touched on, do you want to lead the market? Do you want to lag the market? Do you want to match the market, and why? Those are things that you need to be considering. And once you kind of have those decisions in place, it's going to build confidence in the ranges and then communicate those decisions to your staff, or at least your managers, so that your management team has some confidence in the ranges as well. Another thing that I'm hearing from when we talk to other organizations that in other states that have had this type of legislation go through, we had a chance to talk to a Colorado employment attorney, and one of the things that he talked a lot about was organizations wanted doing a pay equity review. And that's something that we would advise treading a little bit carefully on. Brenda, I think you had some good insights on why that is.
Yeah, I think so. When we talk about, you know, it's a little bit of, if you go to a marriage counselor and the marriage counselor gives you a bunch of great advice and you walk out and are not interested in doing anything with it, it's probably not going to help you. That's kind of the same thing in pay equity, right? So when we talk about pay equity and someone says, hey, I'm going to do a pay equity report, I want to see, and again, our public employers who are joining us today, we work with them. They're used to the pay equity report, right? And it's pretty, it's a really interesting thing to see, just because we're HR nerds, so we love that. But if you're saying, hey, I just kind of want to see where we are, right? I just want to test the water, see, do we have issues? Do I have equity issues? If you do that on your own and you don't plan on doing anything with it, you've got no protection. You've got no protection over that information. Really, all you have is that you determined, oh, I looked at this and I decided, or I discovered, oops, we pay this protected class statistically less than we pay this non-protected class or this protected class, whatever it might be. And so if you're not sure that you're going to do something with it, partnering with an employment law attorney to review that pay equity and have privilege around that pay equity reporting is a really valuable thing to do. So if you don't have an employment law attorney that you trust and that you would have this with, we have a couple that we really highly trust and send referrals to quite often that would be able to do this work with you. But again, this is really about, if you don't know what you're going to find. And really the bigger question, if you don't know you're going to do anything with it, you're not convinced that your organization, your owner, your leader is really to do anything with that, then you want to be thoughtful about what data you're going to have in your hands that doesn't have some type of privilege around that with an employment law attorney.
Yeah, great. And another one that comes to mind as we look at your impact to the workforce is retention around career growth. One thing as we think about the decision of posting the full range versus just maybe the hiring range, a smaller section of the existing range, is how that's going to be perceived for someone who's looking for a promotional opportunity. And that manager title opens up, let's say, and maybe I'm an individual contributor now making $53,000 a year, something to that effect. But because I'm a seasoned employee, I might be at the top of the range or near the top of the range. And then when that new promotional opportunity finally comes open that I've been excited for, and then it's only posted at, let's say, $55,000 to $60,000 a year, that's what the team has posted. I might not be all that excited about that because it's a big increase in responsibility, and that's only just a few $1,000s over what I'm currently making today. And if the internal team that posts that position isn't transparent with staff about what that range means, or if I don't have an understanding of that's just a small portion of the range, I might be eligible for compensation beyond that, or there's much more growth than I have in my current pay range, I might not apply, or I might go see what other manager positions are available that my competitors have posted that maybe have a little bit higher starting range. So,
yep.
You know, we're talking a lot about ranges here and the impacts of those. So Brenda, what else do we need to be thinking about with the pay ranges?
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael. And I think all of what we've talked about so far, that the impact on recruitment, the impact to your internal workforce, the compliance impacts, which real, and some of those compliance impacts are about getting your speed to posting when you have an open position. And for any of you with hiring managers who have an open position, it's so stressful. Everybody's goal is to get a position posted and hired as quickly as possible. All of these things drive us to the solution, which is to have a compensation philosophy. And so there's kind of, we're at the very end of the presentation today, we're going to give you some call to actions that you can take away from here today as kind of your to-dos. And really they're driven by picking a lane. Lane one is address the individual things that you can when you can. Lane two is, hey, we're gonna be a strategic leader here, and we're gonna have a compensation philosophy. We're gonna look at our compensation as a whole picture. We're going to look at compensable factors, which is straight money, right? We're going to look at non-compensable factors like benefits, flexibility, travel, whatever it might be. Sometimes travel is a benefit, sometimes it's not, depending on who you're talking to. And so your compensation philosophy really is about all these things together, right? So it's talking about, are we going to be transparent, and to what level are we going to be transparent? And we're going to be intentional. We're going to tell our employees, hey, all of our managers know all of our ranges. If at any point you have a question, you can sit down with either HR or your manager and they can walk you through it. Maybe your decision is, hey, we're just going to put it all out there, right? We're just going to be open and fully transparent with all of our ranges. How are you going to share about total compensation? How are you going to track that and compare that? Are you going to look at market and position data, right? And the compensation philosophy really does require market and position data, and deciding, like Michael said, where do you want to be in the market, right? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be in the middle? Do you want to be somebody who is paying on the lower end, but you have a lot of benefits on the other side, whatever it might be, and kind of taking all of that. And Michael, I like the way you explain compensation philosophy. And so I want to have you wrap up the slide as you talk about it, because really this is an area of service that you lead this area in our firm and do such a great job. And so just kind of walk us through, what do you talk about with compensation philosophy with clients? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think compensation philosophy it can be a little bit off-putting for some clients who have not had one in the past, or it feels too formal. They like to kind of pay people at how they want to pay people. But at the end of the day, compensation is the story of why you pay employees the way you do. And Brent, I think you set the stage well for us here, but some of the things that are often missed with compensation philosophy that are going to be especially important come January here is around transparency and who's going to see your compensation philosophy. I think historically it's been leadership team or HR team would develop it, and it kind of stays in that group. Some organizations are sharing that with managers now. But I would encourage you to think about, can the rest of our individual contributors see what the compensation philosophy is? Is that going to be a value add to help our employee value proposition, help improve retention, to get buy-in? And yes, we are intentional about paying people the way and this is why. And if that is a scary thing to think about right now, I would encourage you to really think about, ask yourself, why are we paying people the way we are? And do we need to reevaluate it? Is it working? And those are the things that we ask clients when they come to us for help with a market study, because if you don't have answers to those questions, then you might find yourself getting kind of bullied by the market data that you find, and you don't necessarily have to do that. The compensation philosophy is kind of the goal, and then the market data dictates how you get there. I think another important piece is, Brenna, you touched on compensable factors, and making sure employees understand why they might fall within a pay range where they are. So there's a difference between starting someone at the minimum versus the midpoint versus the maximum, and giving employees that context around, well, what drives a pay increase to the midpoint? Well, maybe it's your education level for a certain position. Maybe it's the experience that you have. Many organizations are doing pay per performance, so your performance evaluations tie directly into that. All of these things should be kind of outlined within your compensation philosophy, so that, again, we talked earlier about giving your managers the confidence to be your first line of defense. Your comp philosophy should be the piece, the tool that they have in their back pocket, so that they can answer some of the questions they might be getting. And it's what kind of closing thought here is worth noting, that there's no one size fits all. There's no right solution for everyone as it relates to transparency. Brenna had talked about, some people are sharing, or like in the public sector where it's very transparent. You could go to a city council meeting where I present a comp plan to a client, where I show not only what the entire pay structure looks like, but also how each individual position is comparing to market. So that level of transparency is almost unheard of in the private sector. But on the flip side, the private sector has historically been very tight to the chest with their compensation, and there's not a lot of visibility in there. So many organizations are kind of trying to find out, where do they fall within that? How does it balance out with our pay for performance model versus pay for longevity? So those are ways that we can help clients, is to say, let's talk about these things and figure out what is the right level of transparency for you and your organization.
Yeah. And really, I think to tie this back, that story is that internal employees are going to be greatly affected by this story, whatever the story is that your compensation philosophy is. And so when Michael, a great example, if you think about this, so let's say that you are hiring in human resources and you hire somebody as an HR generalist, they just came out of college. And so they were hired at the very low end of the range because maybe they had a degree, but they didn't have any years of experience. And so then they worked for your organization for 5 to 10 years. And they were promoted, they applied for and received a promotion to an HR manager, which is exciting. But they started at the very low end of the HR generalist position. And so now what's going to be driven by your compensation philosophy is, do you look at this candidate? And I will tell you, we see this happen all of the time, that an internal candidate applies for a position and is given a certain salary or a wage offer. But if they would have applied externally, they would have been offered more because they would have been, if they just looked at their years of experience and degree and whatever it might be, if they applied externally, they would have started in the middle of that range versus in the other range. And so being really intentional and understanding that you need to level that playing field is really important. And that's driven by a compensation philosophy. Okay, Leah, before we're going to jump into case studies next, but before I do, I know you are answering, I'm sure, dozens of questions. Anything that's coming up from the group that's worthwhile to throw out to us that
There's been some great questions. I'd really encourage all of you in the Q&A section. There's open questions and there's answered questions, and I have been providing answers and links to resources. So feel free to go to the answered questions and pull that down. A lot of the questions are really circling around the Wage Disclosure Act, which I think is still a surprise for a lot of employers. And so I'm really trying to stress the fact that it's not just the notice, but it's making sure that your managers aren't actually doing anything in day-to-day practice to sort of discourage those protected conversations. That's a really important thing that they've had that training, even if you have the notice in the handbook. And then the other thing that keeps coming up is just some of these specialty pay situations. We have union employees that might have multiple contracted rates, or we have 100% commission. What are we supposed to post? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael and Brenna, you've really been digging into this issue, but I think right now there's just a lot of things we don't have a lot of specific guidance on. But we do know that the state is going to likely expect employers to make a good faith estimate. Leaving it blank isn't going to be one of the options. I don't get the impression.
I agree. I think that they're really leaning into the good faith effort, and it's almost like this bill got kind of snuck in amongst many other bills, and we didn't catch it until about a month after it was passed, actually. And we anticipate there's going to be expanded definitions and rules that go along to answer some of these questions. So I guess hang tight, and if you have multiple rates, I would say you can post them if they're locked in, or just put a comment in there saying additional rates may apply for out-of-class work or something like that. I think that demonstrates a good faith effort. We also don't have a lot of guidance on how it's going to be enforced or what penalties would be in for non-compliance, but I would anticipate, or hope I should say, that they are going to provide some guidance on that prior to the January 1 effective date.
Yep. All right, so let's get into the really fun stuff, which is the case studies. So I'm going to fly through this case study foundation and then throw it to Michael because we have some scenarios. Don't worry about the case study details, because on each next slide, everybody, on the scenarios, we do have the case study details there. So here's what we're starting from. We have an open position for a maintenance technician. And historically, you've had an informal pay range. And really that means this pay range is like, normally it's between 20 and 30, but that pay range is really just based on what you've always been able to hire people at. Nobody's kind of sat and set a really intentional one. Currently, you have 3 employees in that same position, and they're paid $21, $28, and $35. Generally, the maintenance manager who hires for this has not had any influence on the starting rate. HR posts this job, and to comply with the legislation, they post the starting range of $23 to $26 an hour. They do not have a compensation philosophy. Again, they've just kind of always said, the range is like this, and then they pay the candidate based on what they are worth, right? That's their current compensation philosophy. What's the candidate pool? What do I have to pay them? So here is scenario 1. Michael, walk us through scenario 1 here.
Yeah, and this is an example of where posting just a starting range that doesn't capture the full range becomes a potential issue for employees. So Brenda had mentioned you have an employee currently making $21 an hour, which is $1 over your established minimum of the range that was kind of loosely defined. So he sees this posting as 23 to 26 and notice I'm $2 under what you're advertising for this position, and starts to wonder about that. And he goes and talks to another maintenance tech and finds out that that employee is making $28 an hour. Just for additional context, that person at 28 has 3 years of experience, and the person at 21 just has 1 year of experience. So the employee comes to you in HR or in a leadership role, upset and looking for a pay raise based on this posting. So before we dive into some of the solutions here, it's worth noting that this is if this is a scenario you find yourself in, this is what you hope happens, and that the employee comes to you and asks about it versus just checking out or going to see what other competitors are offering that maybe have an opportunity to get that pay increase that they're looking for. We recognize that that might always be the case, but in this case, you have an employee you have a good relationship with and they come to you, and that's great. So a couple things with this one that you might want to consider is, like we talked about a few times already, we can't tell this employee that they can't talk to their peers about work. The fact that they went out and had a conversation about pay, that's perfectly within their rights, and that we can't obviously take any sort of retaliatory measures against that. But that said, that doesn't mean that we have to talk to employee A about employee B's pay. We can still draw that line and say, hey, look, you can talk to your peers about pay, but we're here to talk about your pay. So really make sure that you're setting that tone from the beginning, and that you're not going to necessarily get into why that other employee is making 28 and he's only making 21. But hear the employee out, let them make their case about, okay, I understand that our range was at 23, you're at 21, and you're looking for this raise. Let's talk about it and hear their feedback. And you might find that they have a case to be made, and the offer was made at 21 based on maybe you made this hire before that salary history prohibition, and you knew that this employee was only at 16 in their last role, and they were really happy to take 21, and there wasn't an issue. So you might be able to explain that, or maybe there's a range consideration that and until an employee reaches 3 years of experience or reaches a certain level of certification, that they kind of stay in this first section of the range below 23. And once the employee gains that amount of experience, they'd be eligible for an increase. But again, if you don't have a pay philosophy or compensation philosophy that kind of outlines these things, that's going to be hard to explain to that employee. You might be hard pressed to not just say, okay, well, if we're bringing a new hire at 23, we might as well bring this person in at 23 as well. And that's the other thing that you could look at here is, Brenna had mentioned that this has kind of been a range that's just been established as historically, that's what we paid, so that's what we're going to go with. But consider going out to market and figure out, is this actually what the market is paying for these positions? Are we aiming too low with it? Should our start of the range actually be 23 if that's what we're seeing is the going rate these days, and make that formal adjustment?
Yeah, and Michael, can I just plug even?
Yeah.
I have a question for you, but before I ask it, I want to plug here. I'd like everybody to just take a moment and imagine your most, I'm going to say the most challenged hiring manager that you have, or even challenged department manager that you have, least experienced, roughest around the corners, hardest time not telling employees to shut up and do their job. And imagine an employee coming to them and having this conversation if you haven't trained them on how to have that conversation, right? Like, this is real. Again, like this is a really pretty utopian vision of what could happen. But we know there's a whole lot of managers out there in the workforce that would be like, you should just be glad for what you're getting paid and quit talking to your buddies about what they're getting paid and focus on your damn job, right? Like, we know that exact conversation is going to happen if you are not preparing them. So
Yeah.
Michael, what do they do to prevent this from happening, right? So like we know what doesn't work, which is a scenario one here. So what do they do to prevent it from happening?
Yeah, and luckily we have a few months for employers to start preparing for this. So hopefully you don't find yourself in this situation. And I think the most effective way to prevent this exact scenario from happening, or to address it before it becomes an issue, is to look at your existing pay ranges and figure out where people are paid within them. So I would pull a report of my employees and say, okay, are you at the minimum, below the minimum, above the maximum? Just get a sense of where your employees are relative to their pay ranges, or if you have pay range defined. And then that way you can kind of predict that this type of thing might happen before you have an open position. So if I see that I have this employee at 21 and I know that I'm going to need to post at 23, I might want to pull in the maintenance manager and talk about that before I post this role to say, hey, is this an opportunity for us to increase this employee's pay? They're going to see we're advertising it at 23. It might be an issue for them. Or if they're not ready, you can have a proactive conversation with that employee to say, just want to let you know we're posting for this position because we just had that resignation. We're starting it at 23, but here's why it's 23 and not at 20. So get ahead of that as best you can, and don't wait for it to be an issue for the employee. You know,
Yep.
Brent and I were joking when we were putting some of these slides together that hope is not a strategy here. You can't just sit and hope that employees aren't going to notice these things. So the more proactive that you can be, the better.
All right, I'm going to fly us through this next scenario, Michael. So we've got a hiring manager perspective here, right? So we can't just think about the candidates and the HR and the hiring people, but this is a hiring manager who is like, listen, I got to get people to do the work. So they've had a position open for over 60 days. They finally have a candidate with minimal experience, and that experience is good enough. They just need a body that's not going to make it worse. HR or the leader of the organization recommends they start at $23 per hour. And the hiring manager comes and is frustrated because the last employee quit after 90 days because they found a higher paying job. And that manager wants to pay starting at $26 an hour instead of 23. And again, remember the same details over on the right-hand side, same case study. So different scenario from the hiring manager's perspective, but same details. So you have current employees in 21, 28, and $35 an hour. So Michael, what do they do here?
Yeah. This is a tough one, and one that I think is going to be relevant for managers who have not been involved in the process historically. They're going to see this information and they're going to start asking why or pushing back on some of these offers. So the first thing that comes to my mind if a manager came back to me and said, I want to start at 26 instead of 23, is you have some concerns with the existing employees, right? You have the employee paid at 21 with only 1 year of experience. So if all of a sudden we're bringing someone in at 26 with minimal experience as well, that's an equity issue that you're going to have to right size at some point. Either that employee is going to be really upset and leave because we can't afford to pay 2 people at 26, or you're going to have to just fork up some cash and get someone caught up to keep that employee if they see, because we know that employee is already talking to his peers today. So when you bring in that hire, that person might ask, hey, what'd you get offered? Or what are you making starting out here? So that's one concern that I have, but you also have wage compression on the other end too. We have an employee at $28 with 3 years of experience. And now if you're going to bring in someone with minimal experience at 26, that's not a lot of difference between a seasoned employee who maybe is historically a high performer for you, making $28 an hour. You might want to have a little bit of separation there between an experienced employee and a new hire coming in with little amount of experience. The other thing
Right.
that
And Michael, is it safe to say, oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Oh.
I was going to say, is it safe to say that to prevent this from happening again, this is back to power is knowledge, right? So knowledge is power, the opposite. Power is not knowledge. I'm not Spider-Man, obviously. So knowledge is power. So that really understanding before you post the position, hey, do we have wage compression because we're not paying our experienced people enough, right? Is our wage compression because our high point is too low, right? So maybe we haven't adjusted our kind of casual range of $20 to $30 in 15 years, which is no longer effective. That's what we started when this leader started it. And so really understanding that ahead of time. And I think what I encourage people to do in this scenario is, if ahead of time, this comes back to anybody leading recruiting, internal culture, compensation, wage, really understanding the business basics of what it costs to have a position open, to recruit for a position, what it costs when you lose kind of that internal knowledge when somebody resigns, right? So let's say somebody's been here for 15 years and they're on the low end of the wage range because they were hired when it was much lower. And we don't catch them up, but we're like, but they could just leave, it's fine, we could replace them. Yeah, but can you replace that 15 years of knowledge? And is there a cost to that? And really understanding, hey, yes, that short-term cost to our payroll might be X amount of dollars, but we can do that now, or we can do it with turnover. We're still going to end up paying that much in turnover costs, but it's going to be unplanned. We're not going to be able to control when it happens. It's going to impact our business, right? I'm preaching to the choir, aren't I, Michael? We're like, we have conversations like this all the time. We're like, come on, guys, you can do it.
Yeah. And I think having that proactive conversation with the manager before this long, frustrating recruiting process goes into effect is really important too, because at this point, this manager's had this open position for 60 days. They're short staffed. They're just trying to get someone in the door. And they have this feedback that the last person quit because they found a higher paying job. And that's kind of the last note that I would leave in this scenario is really look into your exit interview feedback if you're collecting exit interviews. I think that's one of the most underutilized sources of information within organizations. And oftentimes it's because you're not asking enough questions when an employee leaves. Sometimes you'll just send a survey out and the employee says, oh, I left to get a higher paying job. But in almost any case, employees aren't going to leave for a pay cut or for a lateral move. They're always going to move for a higher paying position. I think a more impactful question to ask or a follow-up question to ask is, but why did you start looking for a job? Were you unhappy about pay to begin with, or were you unhappy about something else? And then because of that, you looked elsewhere and then happened to find a job that is going to give you more money. So start looking for those underlying causes that people are looking to start finding another opportunity. And if it's about pay, obviously you have to correct that. Otherwise you're going to have a revolving door. But you might find that this manager is not very effective at onboarding staff and they're feeling overwhelmed as soon as they're in the door. And there's a kind of a higher turnover rate than other departments. And then you have a manager training issue. And then last note, because I know we gotta move on, but I was just going to say the push back on interview feedback too. If you have someone saying this is just good enough, or we just need a body, and then they want to bring them in at the higher end, that's a manager training opportunity as well.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So let's talk now a completely different case study. So throw out the maintenance tech, not the real person, just that example. And this is a very different scenario, one that I know Leah, Michael, myself, and all of the Workforce Solutions team, we see probably on a weekly basis. So you're a growing business and you're the owner or the leader, and you've just always trusted your gut in hiring people. So you know what you need to pay to make the decision when you talk to the candidate, right? You don't even know what you're going to hire the candidate for with a title until you've met the person and you interviewed them and you know what their role is. All of the functions go through you, and you're really proud of the fact that you act like a family, not like a big business. And you're not going to let yourself switch and to become this kind of corporate entity. You want to stay that way. So you're creating a new operations manager role, and you need it filled quickly because your business is growing and you've got a bunch of new things happening that you know you need an operations manager to lead. You, as the owner or the primary leader, you see it as a critical part of your long-term strategy. And so you know that this person could either be an operations manager, an operations director. If it's the right person, you know, in 5 years, they could become the COO, they could become the CEO. You know that you just need to hire the right-hand person to be this, and you want to post this position. And so now you're in Minnesota on January 1st, and you need to post a range. And so, Michael, oh, Lordy, what does this person do and how do they post it? So do they post it? This range is from $20,000 to $190,000. Or do they just post like, I don't know, maybe it's 75. How do they know what to post and what are they doing here?
Yeah, I think you have a couple different options depending on your appetite for spending some money to get some real market data, or just how much you care about getting a range that is meaningful. Because I think a lot of small business owners, especially, just like you said, Brenna, they know what they want and they know it when they see it. So you could kind of take an informal approach here and go out in Indeed, because we talked about earlier, Indeed is providing salary range estimations for similar positions. So go kind of scour Indeed or other job boards and just see what else is out there to get a ballpark estimate of what you think the pay could be, and post a little bit wider than you would typically, just to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room to get that right candidate and get them in where you want them to do. You can also connect with your peer network and see what they've been hiring or how they've been handling this, what's worked, what hasn't worked. There's going to be a little bit of trial and error, I think, for organizations right around that 30 employee mark where they have to comply with this, but they're just trying to figure out the best way to do that. So connect with your peers, connect with other resources that you might have access to get some guidance on this. A more strategic approach would be to outsource this process a little bit and go and do a formal market study. If you really want to be intentional about, hey, I want to get the right person, but I don't want to overpay them if you're price sensitive, or I want to get the best possible candidate. So I want to really know what the market's paying it and pay a premium on that. Go out and get some reliable market data. Indeed is a good starting point, but it's going to be kind of crowdsourced data. It's a lot of self-reported information from candidates looking to price out their job searches. So at Abdo, we provide the service where we use a very reputable data source. We can filter by industry, revenue size, geographic locations, and really give you a tailored approach to compensation. So that's a more formal approach, but obviously there's a cost with that. So you really have to determine how intentional do you want to be about setting that range, and then drill in from there.
Yeah, and really, I think when the clients that we work with have this conversation with us and say, what do we do? Really, our answer is be true to yourself. And Billy, so if you prefer to be a person who hires you want to hire somebody who's got potential and you want to train them in to be, then great, then put that in your job posting. Be really
Mhm.
upfront and honest. Here's the pay range for this position, but my intent is to hire and that this person will become my right-hand person, and I'm going to have their, they are my retention, my succession plan, they are a person, they're my growth plan. Be really honest about it. Or if you're saying, nope, I don't have any bandwidth to train somebody and I need somebody to hit the ground running, say, hey, I'm willing to pay on the high end for the right candidate that can hit the ground running. This is what I'm looking for them to bring to my business. So really understand that. And in your job posting, be very clear about that. You've got about a paragraph before you lose
Yeah.
most candidates. So
And
very few read the essential functions, just FYI, unless they know exactly what they're looking for.
And last note on that, because I know we have to move on, I would just say make sure you're thinking about how your internal team is going to respond to that posting. If they're not familiar, if you have exclusively individual contributors in a very small management team and they might not have an idea of what an operations or HR director or HR manager could earn, and they see a big number there, there might be a little bit of pushback or concern. So just be prepared for that as you look to post as well.
Yeah, right. So, okay, so what do? We have, let's see, we've got like 4 minutes, Michael, to shut down on what they should do, 4 or 5 minutes. And then Leah will hopefully give you like 2 minutes at the end for any questions from the group. But so here's what we need to do. So call to action, if you don't do anything outside of listening to this amazing content today, here's what you need to do. You need to take a step back and think, either review your compensation philosophy, or if you don't have one, really decide, do we want to create one? If we aren't creating one, why aren't we creating one? Do we understand? And who are the people in this organization that need to be part of that discussion, right? Who are the leaders that we need to get together to understand? Kind of on a more micro level, on what I would do I would say, okay, what are the positions that I post, that I recruit for on an annual basis? And do I have ranges for those positions? Do I have clear ranges? And then do those clear ranges make sense with who I have currently on those positions, right? And if the answer is not like yes, 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 then you know where your starting point is, right? So you really need to have confidence in your pay ranges and your managers, not just your hiring managers, but your department managers, any manager who talks to employees. Period. Who does a performance review, who does a compensation review, who hires, who somebody would come to and say, hey, I'm thinking about quitting, needs to understand the pay ranges, how they work, what compensation, both compensable and non-compensable things are in your organization. You need to equip and train your managers so that they're prepared and understanding. And like Leah said, not just the Wage Disclosure Act is one of those things that lots of people still are like, wait, the who's it, what's it? I can't do what? I can't prohibit asking what? There were still a lot of people are catching up on that. So making sure you're not asking for what people are currently paying, that you're not prohibiting and even really discouraging. That's actually important. Not even discouraging and making it known that you're annoyed by talking about compensation. And then start talking about, okay, all those things are going to really make it clear about what am I going to do when it comes to posting in January? How am I going to post pay ranges? Bonus points for internal HR people who do a mock trial of it and are like, hey, okay, here's my most common posted position. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to post it for this range. And now I'm going to pretend like I'm an employee. And how would I feel about that? I'm going to go look at all my employees in that position and what is their pay and who would they talk to? And are those people ready? And kind of play out what that would look like once that time frame comes. And while January 1st is the official hard deadline, again, a lot of this is happening already. There are lots of organizations who are already putting it out there. Indeed, and not just Indeed, but lots of other ones, LinkedIn, Monster, they're all crowdsourcing data to give you this information to do that. And so really understand kind of what's that going to be. And Michael, final thoughts on call to action and kind of how people can reach out to us from here, and if they have questions and what to do. Who should they phone with their bat phone? And then Leah, I think we got a minute or two for any questions that came from the group.
Yeah, I would just say that call to action slide had a lot of content on there. And at the end of the day, just start asking yourself why. Why are we paying the employees this way? Why are our ranges set to this level? Are your managers equipped to answer the why from the employees about why am I starting at 23 versus 25? I think with pay transparency, that why question just comes up a lot. And if you want to start looking at, okay, how do we prep ourselves to answer why, reach out to Brent or I. We can help with manager training, getting your managers equipped and how to talk about pay, because that's been something that's been kind of avoided at the manager level for so long. And that's something that's going to be really important to make sure you're not getting yourselves in any compliance issues, and just making sure that your managers are giving employees what they're looking for. And then I really
Awesome.
spend a lot of my time on the market analysis side. So if you're looking to establish those pay ranges, comp design, that's where I can add some value.
And we have UCR emails here, so feel free to email us. You are afterwards going to get an email from the Abdo team that has all of the slides contained here. So all the content that you've got, and it's going to be a link to the webinar you can watch for free to your heart's delight. Maybe you don't want to watch the Olympics and you actually want to watch this again tonight. That could be an option for you. But that's going to come out, and they'll have a link on there too if you just want to connect with Michael or I, just to like say, I don't even know where to go with this. Help me just think through it. You can click that and schedule with either of us. And Leah, close us all down with any brilliance from the Q&A or that you've seen. Leah's been working in this field for years and years, and sees this particularly on the highly compensated employee side, on the very high senior leadership side. So Leah, why don't you close us down with anything from the field?
I would say we had some fantastic questions and awesome content. I don't have a ton to add. I think everybody did a great job today, but I would say we did get a lot of questions about wanting templates for things. And this is an area where I would just really strongly encourage employers. It's not most of this, the why that Michael's talking about, all these answers to these questions, they're not copy paste. They really do need to be customized to your organization, your goals, your leadership style, how you think and feel about compensation. So be wary of template fixes for some things like compensation philosophy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. We appreciate you for joining us here today. Feel free if somebody else asks, and you can send the webinar on. Anybody, you don't need to have attended today to watch it for free. So feel free to share that. And we look forward to hearing and seeing some of you at the SHRM conference. We have a booth at the SHRM conference coming up in October. And then we also have another webinar coming up in September on Secure 2.0. And if you don't know what that is, that's related to benefits and retirement. It's very important. So feel free to sign up and register for that one. Otherwise, reach out to Leah, Michael, or I at any time.